Hey guys, it's Ash from BeingSwenglish, and you might remember that a week ago I put out a video about how great the Swedish system is for people with kids, families and parents, and it really is. It's incredibly beneficial. There are so many perks to living in Sweden in terms of giving you a really good work-life balance, and if you haven't seen that video yet, then do go and take a look. Also, just to say, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button below. Now, I did share that video in a few different Facebook groups, and it's always good to do that because you attract new commentators to the content that maybe aren't aware of the channel, and so it's quite nice to get additional input. Everybody responded very positively, but there were a couple of comments opposing the elements that I raised in the video, which I found really interesting. The two commentators kind of suggested that, well, yeah, you have to pay tax though. Well, you have to pay tax in every country. No surprise there, really. That's how countries operate and function. And when you have a country where there's no tax revenue, you end up with a country that's falling apart. So that was a bit of a no-brainer. But another lady responded, becoming quite angry actually in her comments. She was opposing the fact that a lot of the tax revenue in Sweden does go towards families or people with children. She feels that a significant proportion goes towards funding kids, and she hated that because she has no kids and no desire to have kids, which is absolutely fine. She continued to say that she wants to opt out of the Swedish tax system completely and that she hates being told what to do. She suggested that other countries have far lower tax and that apparently they work well, but she couldn't quote any of those countries. So I'd be very, very interested to know which country she's referring to. Probably countries where the tax revenue is very, very low because the population are very, very high earners. For example, Jersey and those offshore countries where you find a lot of companies basing themselves. She also then started talking about black-haired, non-Swedish people, or to quote her, non-ethnic people, and that she might as well turn to crime because apparently the government look after criminals better and invest more in their areas. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? A little bit like a certain Swedish political party propaganda, right? No guess who she's voting for at the next elections, which is fine because Sweden is a democracy, and that's a great thing about this country, that there are political parties on the far left and the far right, and by the population voting with proportional representation, you do end up with a balanced political representation, which is fine. But regarding tax, I really do feel that she's deeply wrong. And so I thought it'd be good to put a video out there talking about the benefits of the Swedish tax system. It's not going to be fully comprehensive, but let's talk about the big ones. Now, I want to start with university. In so many countries in Europe and wider, outside of Europe, and look at America especially, you pay a lot of money for going to university. You pay a lot of money for your kids to go to university. You pay a lot of money for you to go to university in later education. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, nurses, teachers, dentists, they all need to go to university in order to practice their professions. And quite frankly, that's not just a benefit to them, but it's benefit to us. When you go to your doctors, when you go to your dentists, when you need a lawyer, when you need an accountant, when you need a teacher in later education, all of those guys went to university. And if they didn't, then we wouldn't have those resources. Look at the UK, where there is a shortage of many of those professions. And we have the university system to thank for providing those people with the expertise. Now, I didn't go to university, but I don't resent funding in my tax here in Sweden people that do go to university, because one day I or my children or my parents will need those services. Now, in Sweden, university is free. Isn't that amazing? You pay for it in the UK now. You pay for it in many countries. In fact, if you compare it with the USA, the costs over there are extortionate. In fact, in America, dental students graduate from university with an average debt of around $215,000. Can you believe that? That's 2.1 million Swedish krona. So it really is a good system here, and there's no reason why anybody should really resent education because it's decent. Now, this lady that commented actually talked about knitting courses, and she resented funding people's knitting courses. Anyway, when you go to a doctor's, I massively appreciate that medical service that I get from the nurses and the doctors, and you know, that brings us on to another thing really, which is the healthcare. Now, if you look at the NHS in the UK, it's absolutely brilliant. I've never had any complaints about the NHS, but it does vary depending on the region that you live in the UK. But again, here, healthcare is subsidised, and effectively you could look at it as being free. You do pay for your appointments for doctors, but that's one payment for the term of that treatment, whatever treatments it might lead to. And I think that's great because it means there's less waiting times, less queuing, and you can get an appointment pretty quickly here as well. In addition, prescription costs are capped. It's called hög kostnadsskydd, high cost protection, which means that if you have a certain amount of prescriptions over the term of a year, you only pay up to a certain amount, which I think is about 1,000 krona, about £100. And that's it. You don't pay any more than that for that year's term of prescriptions. So again, we have to thank the doctors working in that profession and the brilliant medical care that so far I've not needed anything here. Hålla tumma, as they say in Swedish, or in English, cross fingers. But so far, a really, really good experience. Now, also transport. I believe that transport companies, many of them here, public transport, are government owned, government funded and subsidised heavily. So in the UK, a lot of the buses, the trains are all privately operated, and that's why they're terrible. Whereas here, I believe that the majority of the biggest operators are government subsidised, and that's why ticket prices here are not particularly high, and that's why people don't resent using public transport here, because it's a bargain. There's even other perks like housing allowance for under 29. So if you're under 29, you want to buy or rent a property, there's an allowance to help you get onto that ladder. Isn't that brilliant? There's no inheritance tax here in the UK. I've always found that frustrating. Not that I've needed it yet, and not that my parents are anywhere near snuffing it, but I resent the fact that my parents have worked really hard. They've paid tax on every bit of that income. They've bought property with it. And if and when eventually I inherit that, I have to pay tax on it again. That just seems completely wrong. Now, there are thresholds, of course, but here thresholds are irrelevant because there's no inheritance tax. And if you've lived in the UK, you will appreciate what a con inheritance tax feels like. So what do we pay in tax in Sweden? Well, firstly, Skatt is tax in Swedish, so Skatt, hence the name of the organisation, the regulator, Skatteverket. And Skatt obviously is tax, verket in that context with the sammansättning means tax authority. Now, some myths that you'll read online, mainly the Americans love saying that, oh, in Sweden they pay 57% tax. Well, they like to say that because it's a little bit of rhetoric to try and combat the Americans that are living in Sweden who've realised what a great tax system this is compared to America. 57% is nonsense. In fact, only 15% of Swedish residents pay 57% because that's the top rate of tax. The average Swedish resident pays just 27% tax, which is really, really good. Higher earners, of course, pay slightly more, but that's no different to any staggered tax system, including the UK, where you've got your 40% above your regular average pay, and then you've got the level above that. So it is just marginally above the UK. If you compute what you pay in tax in Sweden per month compared to the UK, it does work out maybe slightly higher here, but for some, it'll be slightly lower. And of course, there is the bracket here as well, where you pay no tax at all, just like in the UK. In fact, a friend recently changed his tax arrangement from paying tax in the UK for his UK employer to paying that tax in Sweden instead. And actually, he's commented that his tax per month is actually slightly lower here, which is good. So then how is the tax basically fairer here? Well, I feel that the great thing here is that tax is related to where you live. So in the UK, it doesn't matter where you live. You pay the same tax, whether you live in a town of 5 houses in the middle of nowhere, or if you live in central London, everybody in the UK pays the same. And that had always felt really unfair to me. Why the hell should I fund a high-speed train between London and the north when I don't live in London, I don't live in the north, I don't need that commuter route, and it's of no benefit to me or the wider society to have that. Was it H102 or something, H12? I can't remember the name of the system, but I think they're still building it. But that always felt very unfair to me when I lived in the southwest, and I really didn't care about what was happening in the southeast at all. So in Sweden, it's split. You have municipal tax and national tax. Now, the national tax is standard. That changes every year depending on inflation, etc. But the municipality tax does also change, but it's different. It's per commune. So basically, in UK terms, it's per council. And I really like that. Now, it ranges between around 28% up to 35%. And as I say, it depends on the city or the town where you live. So if you live in Malmö, which is a big city of, I think, 250,000 population, you'll pay about 32.5%. Whereas if you live in Staffanstorp, a tiny, tiny little town with not many people there, then you pay 30.72%. So about 2% less. Doesn't sound a lot, but on an annual basis, that's a few nice meals out, a holiday per year as well, perhaps. That's based on 2021 tax tables, by the way. But it does mean that you contribute based on your commune. So clearly the bigger communes like Stockholm, the capital, and Malmö are going to need to spend more as a commune to maintain their city than the smaller towns. And so therefore you're contributing towards that. I do like that. Now, the other thing is when I lived in the UK, I felt I didn't see the benefits really of my tax. I felt like the council were constantly having to fix the road, fix the potholes after people complained, rather than actually just proactively improving roads. The roads were always terrible in the UK, and I mean seriously terrible. I loved my cars, and I hated driving those cars because I had low profile tyres and it used to knacker my wheels, and I used to hate that. I really resented it. But also, you know, one of the biggest tax benefits in Sweden for me as a parent is, for example, the förskola system, the school system, preschool. And that is just exceptional. You know, now that isn't the majority of the tax spend here, but it is a massive perk. In the UK, there's just no such thing in terms of being a parent. There's no such perk really. So I do really, really like that. Now, I resented paying tax in the UK, except for the NHS system, which had always served me really, really well. But overall, I just felt I wasn't really getting much for my money there. But in Sweden, I do. I see that tax debit from my monthly salary, and instead of going, oh, seriously, I actually think, yeah, fair enough. You know, it's like going to a restaurant, having a really good meal and getting the bill, and it's, you know, a couple of thousand krona. If the meal wasn't very good, you kind of, do I complain? I don't want to pay that. Ugh. But if the meal was superb and the experience was good and you felt like you got your money's worth, then you just pay it, don't you? You don't moan and complain. And quite frankly, if you do get to that point, you moan and complain, you'll never go back to that restaurant, will you? So for those complaining in Sweden about the tax system, not wanting to do what they're being told to do, what they're being told to pay to live here, for the numerous benefits and perks of living here, I have one element of advice to offer: move. And the irony is, I saw this comment in a Facebook group called Swedes Back Home. So this is a Swedish person that's in theory moved back to Sweden, and they're complaining about Sweden. Anyway, comment on this video with your thoughts. I'd be really, really interested. I just had to have this discussion, or should we call it a rant? I don't know. But it's a really interesting one, and I don't resent the system in the slightest. And you know what? I'm not Swedish, I'm black-haired, I'm non-ethnic, I'm British, but I don't resent paying into this system at all to help other Swedish people who are living here, who don't earn as much as me, who can't pay for their own medical care, who can't pay for their own universities, who can't pay for their numerous children to go to preschool so that they can hunt for a job. So, you know, people like me who are happy to pay into the tax system are helping Sweden, and I'm glad for that. Give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button below if you enjoy this kind of discussion or whatever it is, I don't know. And thank you very much for watching. Cheers, folks.